I applied. My wife thought I was kind of crazy. I mean,
there was finally at this point, she thinks you're a little crazy.
She thought I was crazy all along because she was with me when I was homeless after the Marine Corps. I had nothing going for me. And thank God, she saw something in me then.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. It might be easy to overuse the term interesting, but I believe that my guest this time truly has an interesting story. He went from the Marine Corps to being homeless, to then Harvard, to today having a successful leadership coaching and consulting business. Now, granted, that's a 30,000 foot view of his life. There's obviously more when you get into it at a more granular level, but it is truly an interesting story, including a lifelong passion for martial arts. He's a black belt in Jiu Jitsu. There's a lot to this man's story, but I'm going to leave it for him to tell it. So let's get into it. Here's episode 145 with Jon Cobb.
Yeah, I could talk about what I did right after I left the Marine Corps. Ended up homeless for a while, working my way through 9 different schools, consulting, started my own company. And then I've got a job search course I created to help people looking for new opportunities to understand how to get hired. And I'm doing a retreat in September to Costa Rica to help people kind of plan the next chapter of their lives. So I think those might be really helpful for people.
Whereabouts in Costa Rica?
Nosara. In Guanacaste, West Coast.
I've been down to Tamarindo once, and I can't wait to go back.
It's about 30 or 45 minutes south of Tamarindo, so you should come with us.
I will do my best.
All right. This is good content. We should record it.
Record? Oh, we're supposed to record this? Let's do the full package then for our listeners. Take me back to you as a young boy, a young man. Where's hometown and where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, catching snakes and lizards every day, hiking, going on hikes in the mountains by myself at 6 or 7, being as crazy as I could be with my brother, rock climbing without ropes and things like that. So really enjoyed being outdoors a lot and just being close to nature growing up there.
Siblings-wise, just you and your brother?
My older brother and my younger sister.
And as far as your parents, what mom and dad do?
Mom and dad. So my dad worked a lot with church. He was a computer programmer for a company that went down, WorldCom, big scandal back in the day. So I kind of saw what happened to him in his career, super hardworking, and unfortunately didn't work out for him in that career. So that influenced me a little bit. And then my mom was an art teacher.
And as for you growing up, what took up most of your time? Were you more into sports? Were you academics? Just strike an even balance?
Yeah, super into sports, martial arts primarily. My aunt and uncle's family was very deep in the taekwondo world. So I grew up doing traditional martial arts. I found a professor or master that I really connected with and spent all afternoon, every day, Saturday, Sunday, trying to learn martial arts. That was my passion. And I really poured myself into that.
When did you start training outside of training with family members? Like when did you start training officially with a different professor, if you did, in a different dojo?
So I went from me and my brother hurting myself in the backyard with PVC pipes, and we were making nunchucks with wooden dowels from Home Depot and stuff, to I was 11 when I found Master Che. And I couldn't afford to pay, my family couldn't afford to pay. So he was generous enough to let me come there for free. I was the kid that just wouldn't go away. So I rode my bike about 2 miles there every day, trained for 3 or 4 hours, rode my bike home after dark. And that was really my whole childhood, just trying to understand martial arts. And that's where I discovered philosophy behind the martial art on that deeper level. And he was a great mentor for me. We still, stay in touch today. But for about 10 years, I spent every waking moment with him that I could learning martial arts.
Did you go down the competitive path?
I competed quite a bit in Taekwondo, ended up on the Marine Corps All-Marine Taekwondo team later. And did probably 200 or 300 tournaments.
I know that taekwondo is, or at least still is, I believe, in the Olympics. Ever any thought of going towards the Olympics with it?
That was my plan. Always dreamed about doing that. I grew up there by the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs.
You're kind of immersed in it.
In fact, my uncle was offered to be the Olympic head coach for the U.S. Taekwondo team at one point, and I trained with one of the former Olympic coaches there in Colorado. So I started off in that traditional role, and Taekwondo competing was a lot of fun. I didn't know what I didn't know in terms of other martial arts. I didn't know what the UFC was or MMA. I saw it on TV. I thought it was WWE wrestling. I assumed it was fake. And then later on, I kind of emptied my cup and started over. So not to jump ahead too much, but I was in Iraq one day, found this jiu-jitsu class, didn't even know what Brazilian Jiu Jitsu was. But I showed up. I was a 3rd degree black belt in Taekwondo, thought I, kind of knew it all. And we were on the ground. And I had no concept. I'd never trained.
Fish out of water.
Fish out of water. And we were a bunch of, strong, fit Marines who had no idea what we were doing. So people were trying to tear my head off for 2 or 3 hours. And I remember that being a really tough night. My body hurt, my neck hurt, and I realized I had more to learn. And so I emptied my little cup and kind of started over then.
As far as you in high school, did it ever go towards any of the traditional sports?
Never had the opportunity. I lived pretty far away from school and missed a lot of school because we couldn't afford gas to drive there, and ended up really getting 2 full years of high school. So I had the opportunity to go to a great school in Colorado, and then I went to a pretty bad school in Virginia for a little while, but that was my high school career, about 2 years.
So did you actually graduate from high school?
I did. But it was kind of a check in the box thing. So I did 2 years of actual classes, and then I wanted to join the Marine Corps, and they said you have to have a high school diploma to join. So I found this kind of online digital program I went through and just kind of, got credit for classes, but there was not a lot of substance to it.
You mentioned your dad's experience in being involved with WorldCom and their fiasco,
Scandal.
But as far as academics, were they pushing academics on you and your siblings?
Not pushing. I always enjoyed learning for the sake of learning. I was reading a lot, even if I didn't do my homework in class. So I was very curious, enjoyed learning a lot, but nobody ever talked to me about going to college. I had one meeting with my guidance counselor while I was, I think, a sophomore. And she said, I heard you're thinking about joining the Marine Corps, so really no reason for us to talk. And that was kind of the extent of my guidance of what it would look like for me to go to college. And I felt like I didn't have the discipline. I didn't have any structure growing up. So part of me thought, I'll join the Marine Corps, I'll grow up a little bit, and then when I go to school, I'll do well. And that's kind of what happened.
Got it. What year would you have graduated high school, in theory?
2005.
2005. And where does the desire to serve in the military come from?
So 9/11 happened while I was in high school, I think my freshman year. And I remember the shock and awe campaign going into Iraq very clearly as well. I was at the gym working out, watching, the night vision shock and awe campaign. And I felt the sense of wanting to protect people. And that's really been a driving force in my life with everything that I've done, wanting to protect people. That's been very important to me. So that was my initial desire to join, and looked at the Naval Academy, tried to put a package together. No one in my family had ever graduated from college before. So getting into the Naval Academy is a very difficult feat. I didn't have the academic scores. I didn't have, SATs or people to write me recommendations. So that didn't work. But the Marine Corps recruiters helped me find my home.
And this is a common question, but how'd you settle on the Marine Corps as opposed to the other branches?
So I think my original interest was Delta Force because of this old computer game, and reached out to Army, Navy, Marine Corps. Marine Corps recruiters got back to me first, fell in love with the uniforms and the fact that they promised me something harder. There's that Marine Corps poster that says, "We don't promise you a rose garden." And I felt like I was going to be held to the highest standard, and it was going to make me a better person. So that's what attracted me. And I found mentors in the recruiters too. I had older men who were successful, disciplined, physically fit, and having those people to look up to really made a difference for me too.
So So you basically had good recruiter experiences.
I had good recruiter experiences. I did.
For you going in, did you have a desire as far as a specific, even if you didn't know it as an MOS, but a specific job you wanted to do once you got in the Marine Corps?
I wanted to be an 0311 infantryman. I wanted to try out for recon. And so I did go in 0311. In fact, they tried to make me a machine gunner. So 5 a.m., I'm in infantry school. It's pitch black outside. We're outside in line. And they're trying to get more people to be machine gunners. So they forced me over to the machine gunner line. And as soon as they walked away, I snuck back into the 0311 infantryman line. So that was kind of fun. But became an infantryman, went to a unit in 29 Palms, Iraq, Mojave Desert. And they told
I'm so
me
sorry.
Well, they told me I was going to go to Hawaii. And, me growing up in Colorado, I was like, this is amazing. I'm going to Hawaii. I thought I was living the dream. And they came back later and said, we're just kidding. You're going to 29 Palms, the worst base in the Marine Corps, if not the entire military.
It's just a stepping stone to Hawaii. You'll eventually get there.
It was a stepping stone to Iraq. A stepping stone to Iraq. So I went back and forth between Mojave Desert and Iraq Desert over and over.
Did you enlist out of Colorado Springs or Virginia?
Out of Colorado.
So did you go to MCRD San Diego?
I went to San Diego.
And for you, already being, I would imagine, having been involved in Taekwondo for so many years, you probably had a built-in natural discipline. But did you find that transition from going to being an 18-year-old kid to now being in the Marine Corps difficult, or pretty smooth transition for you?
I had never really had any authority figures in my life, so I never got in trouble as a kid. But boot camp came pretty naturally to me. I think it's because my Taekwondo master had a veteran background as well. He was a veteran. And so I was used to being in kind of a formation and obeying commands and yelling and things like that. So part of it did feel familiar in that way.
Anybody in your family try to turn you away from going in the service?
They did. This was during the earlier days of the Iraq War. I signed my contract to join the Marine Corps in 2004 when I was still 17 years old. So my parents had to get like a permission slip for me to join the military and go to war. But they signed, they knew it's what I wanted to do. So there were people that were really concerned and saying I was throwing my life away. And then my sophomore year, actually my last year of full high school, I was voted two things by my class. I was voted best biceps and most likely to die at a young age. So those were positive and negative, I guess. But
could have been, a morbid way of foretelling of being a military service member.
Right. Well, that's
especially at that time period.
I think I was talking about heading down that road because I had nothing else. I mean, I felt myself getting sucked into trapped in Colorado. Part of why I dropped out of high school was to help my family pay the bills. And my parents are incredibly wealthy in terms of character and love and faith, but not financially, wealthy. So I felt like I didn't have a future there. And the Marine Corps was something new for me to try.
You said your brother's older than you?
He is.
Any interest for him going towards the military?
I don't think so. He was a writer. He put out a couple of books a few years ago. And so that was really his passion.
You're in 29 Palms.
Mm-hmm.
Is it everything you thought it would be once you were done and assigned to your first unit?
It was very hot. We did a lot of training, long runs in the mountains, which I loved. I always loved the physical fitness side of what we did. We had one of the new Marines that I joined the unit with die within our first month or two on a run. We were doing a run in the hills and he had a heart attack basically and died from that. So that was unfortunate, of course. And we were doing hard training. I mean, we knew that we were deploying later that year to Iraq. So that was our focus.
As far as your opportunity to go to Scout Sniper School, how'd that come about?
So I never got to go to Scout Sniper School. I deployed on my first deployment as an infantryman. I did mounted and unmounted patrols and a lot of machine gun work too. And then I went through the INDOC to join a Scout Sniper team after my first deployment. So my second deployment to Iraq, I was part of a Scout Sniper team.
Did you ever get the opportunity to try out for recon?
I did not. Came pretty close to re-enlisting to go to recon. I really didn't have the swimming background. So, that's something I should have worked on then. and then met my wife towards the tail end right before my second deployment to Iraq. And so I kind of faced this decision between, focusing more on my future wife and going down the special operations route, which was very attractive for me. And I always planned to go back into the military. It just never happened. One thing led to another. And, you have to be very intentional about the decisions that you make in life and your career. And I had other opportunities that I prioritized.
Coming to the end of that enlistment, what were you planning for? Because I'm assuming you didn't reenlist.
I was about one signature away from reenlisting, very torn about leaving the Marine Corps. My plan was to go do college and come back as an officer. And I was worried that if I stayed in reserve or if I reenlisted active duty, that wouldn't happen. I would be pulled down and spend the rest of my career enlisted, which is totally fine. I mean, I wouldn't trade my enlisted experience for anything. Learned so much from that time, but that wasn't the plan. So I almost reenlisted and then decided I'm going to take a break, catch my breath for a minute after back-to-back deployments, and then I'll come back in. And ended up having kids very quickly.
Derailed everything.
Harder and harder to go be a Marine again.
So your first step off out of the Marine Corps was to go back to school?
My first step off, I was about to reenlist. So I was one signature away, and somebody told me to connect with this company that was doing high threat protection for diplomatic security for a State Department. And I thought that'd be interesting. So I applied, and they accepted me to go to their training program, Worldwide Personal Protective Services for Department of State. So I got slotted to go to their training. I think it was a 4-week training, and had that lined up. So I said, okay, I have a plan. I'm going to get out. I'm going to do this, see what it's like. If it doesn't work out, I can come right back in. And turned down like a $90,000 cash bonus to reenlist at that point. I also wanted to reenlist to go to Afghanistan because I'd done back-to-back to Iraq, and I grew up in the mountains of Colorado. So I thought it'd be really great to go see the Hindu Kush Mountains in Afghanistan and compare Iraq and Afghan cultures. And so I wanted to go to Afghanistan. That didn't happen. They said, your unit's going back to Iraq again. I didn't want to do that. So I got out. And then, of course, I went to Afghanistan anyway.
The personal protection company or the assignment that you worked, how long did that last?
So I went to their training, did well. They put me on a waiting list, basically. So I spent the next 3 or 4 months waiting, hoping that was going to work out. And I really ended up homeless during that time. I was living out of my car for a while. I was living in an abandoned barracks on base that I found, sleeping on friends' couches that probably didn't want me there, didn't really have a plan. And I felt pretty isolated. And what I realized was that when I was in the Marine Corps, being on a scout sniper team, I was surrounded by people I trusted. And anytime that, I was sleeping, there was somebody watching over me. And I had that camaraderie. And on the civilian side, I didn't have that. I was really isolated and alone. And so I decided that if I wanted to be successful, or I realized that I needed to find those people that could help me, who had kind of been there and done that. I didn't know anybody who had really gone to college. I didn't know anybody who had a real, white collar or Fortune 500 career, anything like that. So I started reading and talking to people, and eventually found mentors that helped me.
You stayed in Southern California though when you got out?
I did. That's where my then girlfriend was.
And for you long term, was that the plan? Were you thinking stay in California, or was the plan to get back to Colorado?
I wasn't planning to go back to Colorado. I was looking for opportunity. So I was willing to move wherever it seemed like there was a good opportunity.
And we're going to get into this, and you've been through an amazing amount of college, but how does the process for college get started for you?
So I started with tuition assistance in the Marine Corps, just taking 1 or 2 classes. I was in Iraq on my second deployment, trying to take a college class or 2 in between missions. So I go run a mission all night and then try and do my homework the next day. And it was a very slow process, but I felt like I was chipping away at doing something bigger. And it kept that door open for me to better opportunities. So, at that rate, it was going to take me 20 years to finish an undergrad degree. But I felt like I was doing something, and I enjoyed learning. It was kind of a good mental break from the missions that we were running. So taking 1 or 2 classes at a time, literally paper mailing my assignments back from Al-Anbar, Iraq, and instructors were getting these these envelopes that were probably all beat up. Almost a waste of time, but that chipping away did give me a psychological edge too.
So for you, when was there a catalyst or a pivot moment? You're talking about you were living in your car, living in a basically a vacant barracks. What was the first pivot point that kind of got you out of that dark hole?
Good question. I ended up working for a department store, almost minimum wage job, and having this moment driving home where I just felt like I was living the wrong life, like I was in the wrong movie. And, I had been part of an elite team. I felt invincible doing that. And here I was kind of a nobody at the bottom of the barrel. I was making less after the Marine Corps than I was in high school at a restaurant as a server. So I realized something was wrong. And I think it started with motivational videos that I found on YouTube. I mean, just listening to these talks. I talk a lot about Les Brown and, Tony Robbins and other coaches and finding their encouragement and realizing that I had more to offer and getting curious about what I was truly capable of.
There was never a point where you went, this isn't worth it. I'm just going back to the Marine Corps.
I wanted to go back in multiple times, but I knew what that was like. And I'm a really curious person. So I wanted to see what I could do. And I was stuck, but not for long. I found ways to keep moving forward.
Did the protection company ever come through, or did they keep you on the waiting list permanently?
They did. So I spent about 3 or 4 months waiting and then went over to Iraq, to Baghdad with them, and did personal security for John McCain, Senator McCain, when he came over, Senator Joe Lieberman and others, John Thune, and all these congressional delegations coming to Iraq to kind of see what was really going on. So that was around 2009 to 2011. I did that. I went over multiple times, and then also went to Jerusalem and lived there for a while and did personal security for the Consul General as he did diplomatic missions throughout the West Bank. So that was interesting.
How did that time compare? Are you a DoD civilian or just a full-on civilian contractor?
Full-on civilian contractor, GS-12 equivalent is what they called it. But I mean, I was a civilian working for State Department. So doing very military-like things with a little bit more freedom and autonomy and civilian clothes, fully armored Suburbans. And it was a lot of fun. We had more freedom than in the Marine Corps, and doing some really important things to protect the diplomatic missions going on there.
That's what I was going with it. How did you like your time back in Iraq, but now as a civilian operator?
So the first day I got there, they said we needed to check our email every day. And I said, how do you do that? Because my first deployments, we didn't have internet. I mean, I was in the middle of nowhere. We had one satellite phone for like 50 people. So I had internet in my room. I mean, my standard of living went way up, and the food they had at the embassy was incredible compared to, MREs. I ate almost exclusively MREs for 7 months on my first deployment. So standard of living was much higher. I was making more. I was doing interesting things. I got to sit in on meetings between, U.S. diplomats and Iraqi leaders and kind of hear these conversations. And that made me more curious about the impact that I could have, because I felt like I was sitting on the sidelines being this security person. And here were these people making decisions about geopolitics. And some of them knew less about the situation than I did because I had been there. We had one senator come and she wanted to tear down all of the T-walls, the concrete walls around Baghdad. And I told her, ma'am, I don't think that's a good idea. Like, this is still a very dangerous place. So maybe it was arrogance, but I wanted to be in a more strategic position to influence these decisions that were being made.
Did you see this work as just, I'll say, temporary, something just as a stopgap until your next, what you saw as your mission?
It felt like a job, not a career. I knew it wasn't going to last forever. And the fact that I was away from home so much, about 9 months a year, it felt very unsustainable. So I enjoyed it. I still wanted to go back in the military this whole time. That's a big part of who I am. And maybe I got out too soon, but I knew it was not going to last forever. And I wanted to go back to school and finish school too.
When does law enforcement hit your radar?
So I finished my undergrad at Vanguard University, had a great experience there doing night classes, and then I went to law enforcement. When I finally went to school full-time, I took a break from diplomatic security. I was so hungry to go to school that I took triple full-time classes. I took 36 semester credits in one semester. And I basically did double or triple school for over a year and knocked out my undergrad with about a year and a half of full-time focused on school.
Were you already planning, real quick pivot, when you finished or working towards finishing your undergrad so quickly, were you already thinking about advanced degrees like your master's degree and stuff at that point? Or were you just saying, I want to get my undergrad out of the way?
It was in the back of my mind, but I didn't put much thought into it. I really didn't want to get my undergrad right then because I was doing some real estate investing. And so I felt like doing diplomatic security, saving some money, doing real estate investing was working out well. And I didn't know of a normal job that was going to do as much for me. So I was hesitant to focus on school, but I loved learning. I mean, you know, the assignments were kind of annoying sometimes, but I felt like I was growing and I appreciated that. So one of the reasons why I did so much school so quickly was to save my GI Bill because they had a yellow ribbon program. And so if I tripled up my classes, it wouldn't eat up as much of my GI Bill and I didn't have to pay for school. So I used my GI Bill to pay for multiple degree programs, which really helped.
Did you ever get and I'll loosely call it a mentor, somebody who kind of was a point of reference on how to maximize your GI Bill?
That's a good question. I decided to become the expert because I couldn't find anyone who really could give me good advice. I found people here and there, but this is a principle I've applied throughout my career. You have to become the expert in what you want to be good at. And I read dozens of articles. I mean, I read the same articles over 5 or 6 times. Nobody knew more about the GI Bill than I did. And that's kind of been my approach for everything I've done, trying to become the expert and not relying on rumors or what you heard from somebody else. So I read everything I could on the GI Bill and then later on school programs. Ended up applying to be a police officer because I missed the military experience and the camaraderie and the community. And my father-in-law was a police officer, so it kind of felt like the family business at that point. He was an Oceanside PD cop and a San Diego Sheriff's deputy and sergeant. So I was curious, and I went to the Orange County Sheriff's Academy shortly after finishing my undergrad.
You didn't make law enforcement your career, and if I'm understanding correctly, it just kind of didn't work with your life, where you wanted your life to go. Law enforcement wasn't going to put you on that same path. How long did you end up spending in law enforcement?
Spent about a year in law enforcement. I applied to a couple departments, ended up getting an offer from Huntington Beach Police Department, and they had almost 1,000 applicants and they ranked me number 1. So I was honored by that and felt like that might be a good fit for me. So ended up going to the Orange County Sheriff's Academy, sponsored by them. Very similar to the military and Marine Corps in terms of, structure and physical training. And so I enjoyed that, did well there, ended up getting the physical fitness award and graduated at the top of my class there, outstanding graduate for class 209. And so I felt like I was on this positive path for maybe having a career in law enforcement, but it wasn't that strategic impact that I wanted to have that I talked about. So got to field training. Every day is different. That's the best thing about law enforcement. Like every day you're learning, you're challenged with something new. I enjoyed that because I don't enjoy doing the same thing every day.
But unfortunately, what a lot of people don't, and I'll put the veteran community in this, is unfortunately the job is a lot of mundane stuff too.
Sure.
It's never like a TV show. For the greater majority of the time, It's more boring, mundane, day to day, so you get this experience in the academy and you think it's going to be very paramilitaristic. And then you get to a black and white and you're like, this is what we do all day.
And there's so much to learn. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it was easy. There's an incredible amount to learn. I think being a police officer is the hardest job in the country. I've had a lot of different careers to this point. Being a police officer is very difficult. liability, physical threats, being a street lawyer. So I have all the respect in the world for police officers. I had a baby the day after I graduated from the academy, so my wife was
perfect
pregnant.
Planning.
Right. It wasn't planned. But, they didn't appreciate me having a baby. And so I didn't take time off when maybe I should have. And I was always looking for the next thing. And that was kind of my philosophy that had gotten me through life at that point, right? I left Colorado to join the Marine Corps. I had a plan when I left the Marine Corps to do diplomatic security. Yeah, there were bumps along the way, but I was always looking for the next thing. And so even though I was a police officer learning there, I applied to a couple programs. So I got accepted to USC for my MBA. No way I could do that while I was a police officer at that time, being a new person.
What year is this?
2014.
And was their MBA program only in person, or do they offer an online component?
They had like a weekend MBA program, but being a new officer,
you're working weekend nights.
I couldn't even, request any type of schedule adjustment. So
right.
I thought I was being a good officer by trying to continuously improve myself. And they saw it as me not really being interested in law enforcement, that I was pursuing school, which was unfortunate. I also applied to a program at Stanford and got accepted to that. And I felt like that would be better long-term. So I did a graduate certificate program in international security at Stanford and got to take classes with Secretary Ash Carter, who unfortunately passed away pretty recently, and some other incredible people, former Secretary Bill Perry, and just learning from these men who had such a big impact in the world and a strategic impact, really ignited that in me. So I enjoyed that program a lot.
From that certificate program, it if I'm understanding correctly, almost a fire that was already lit just got more intense for more education. Where does college take you from there?
So at this point, I had college credits transferring from the Marine Corps, from the classes I had taken there. I had my undergrad. I had my police academy credits. I had my Stanford graduate certificate program. And from Stanford, I went back to Iraq to do diplomatic security, just for income. And I felt drawn to the ISIS situation. That was the height of the Islamic State crisis in northern Iraq. Mosul had been retaken. And
did you go back with the same company? Same company,
doing diplomatic security in the city of Erbil. So I trained the Kurdish diplomatic security teams during this pretty threatening time. I mean, I think Islamic State front lines were about 30 kilometers away from the city of Erbil, and they were pretty concerned about that city falling as well, because Mosul, the second biggest city in Iraq,
right,
had been completely taken over by terrorists. So
how long did you do that for?
I went there twice, so 8 or 9 months total, and really enjoyed training them. You loved working with the Kurdish people, lots of respect for them, loved the city of Erbil. But again, I was looking for the next thing because I knew that was not a career. It was going to melt away. So I was working on MBA applications that time.
At this point in your educational career, your professional career, did you have something in mind that you were working towards?
You would think.
There's got to be a roadmap.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't that good of a planner at that point. I really, and maybe I did have a plan, I just don't know now. I wanted to improve myself. I enjoyed self-improvement, and I wanted to get an MBA to become a better leader, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So applied to a few MBA programs, got waitlisted at Dartmouth. I really wanted to go to Dartmouth Tuck. Unfortunately, didn't work out. Ended up getting a full ride offer from Vanderbilt for the Owen Graduate School of Management, and built some great relationships there. So I went to Vanderbilt and had a fantastic time there. I did not want to be a consultant. That was the one thing I was sure of. I absolutely did not want to be a consultant. And then I took a leadership assessment. I think it's called the Career Leaders Assessment. And I came out at like 98 or 99 percentile
for consulting.
And so I thought that's interesting, because I thought consulting was like the typical thing you do out of business school. You you know, do the 9 to 5, the rat race. But when I looked at it, these were like special operations teams, a small elite team that goes into a company, quickly assesses the challenges and improves things and then gets out. And you learn more, you work for multiple different companies, so you get a different perspective. And so I felt like consulting was a place where I could learn a lot and work with some great people. And so I ended up going the consulting route.
We're going to take a quick break from the conversation. First, thank you for your continued support. Second, I appreciate the fact that you've made it to this point in the conversation, but I still need more help. If you would, if you're not already, please follow, subscribe on whatever platform you're getting the podcast. If you could leave me a rating, leave me a comment or a thumbs up. And last, if you could share this, either this episode or the podcast, with anybody that you think might benefit from it, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you again. Let's get back into the conversation. For Vanderbilt, was that an in-person program?
It was. So I spent 2 years in Nashville.
And how did that impact your family?
We were excited. We moved around a lot at this point.
Geez, I wonder why.
Yeah. Opportunities.
Hey, babe, don't unpack. I've got another opportunity.
The story of my life. Yeah. Storage units, living out of sea bags. But we moved to Nashville in part because we thought Nashville might be a good place for us to settle down, and loved it there. Great people, great barbecue, lots of live music. So I loved living in Nashville.
You ended up being, even though you didn't want to, you became a consultant. How did that work out for you?
So I was in faith mode when I went to business school, you know, living on what little savings I had. Went above and beyond to try and get a summer internship, which is a big deal in business school because most of your full-time offers after graduation come from your summer internship for these full-time business school programs. So I created my own path there, and I decided that I wanted to go to Deloitte Consulting because they had a good relationship with Vanderbilt. They were known for their culture and their leadership training. But I didn't have any business experience at this point. So here I am in business school. I
got the piece of paper.
Yeah. I've never worked for a real company at this point, though. I mean, I did high threat protection, which was the same thing as the military. So I was really good at, you know, machine gun marksmanship and sniper rifles and stuff.
That doesn't carry over to the business world?
Had no idea how to use a printer. Had no idea how to use a calendar to schedule meetings and all this typical business stuff that people learn in their early 20s going the Fortune 500 route. So I had a big learning curve in business school. And I got this summer internship by just networking and studying. I did dozens of practice cases. We had to do these business simulation interviews, basically. Talked to about 50 people.
How intense were those simulations?
Pretty intense. I did 10 interviews to get my offer from Deloitte. I did a group case with 3 or 4 other people on a whiteboard in front of a panel, and they give you a scenario. Here's a hotel chain. You know, they're not making as much money as they were last year. Figure it out. And you have to ask the right questions. You have to create a framework and fill it in and say, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to identify the problem and address the problem. So it takes a lot of practice. And my goal being a Marine was I might not be as smart as other people. I might not be as experienced, but I will outwork them. And I did more networking and more interview preparation than anybody else.
So ultimately, the consulting work that you would end up doing is business improvement.
That's management consulting. I focused on organizational transformation. So one company buys another $1 billion company. How do you put those two companies together? Or you need to move to the cloud. How do you take every record, document, process in that company and move it to a more digital experience? That type of thing.
Did it keep you in Nashville or in Tennessee?
No. So even though Deloitte had a good relationship with Vanderbilt, and those relationships are very important when you're thinking about the program you want to do for school, I wanted to go to their federal practice. And that made sense for me having a DoD background for me to work in their government and public sector service, is what they called it. And so when I had these networking calls with Deloitte people, they said, that's great, but no one has ever gone from Vanderbilt to our government practice. We don't have a relationship with Vanderbilt from our government practice, and it can't be done. It's impossible. And so I kept saying, well, I think I'd be a really good fit. Challenge accepted. So I kept networking. I interviewed for Deloitte in Atlanta and did reasonably well there. And they referred me to the government and public sector practice and said, hey, we think you'll be a great fit for this team. And I said, I know, that's what I've been saying for the last 4 months.
You didn't listen to me.
10 interviews, eventually got the offer.
At that time, where were they pulling most of their federal consultants for?
Mostly from Georgetown, some from the Harvard Kennedy School, these more public policy focused programs.
So you end up at Deloitte, where you branched out of?
My office was in Arlington. So I lived in Loudoun County there and worked on a DoD project for the Office of the Secretary of Defense on technology transformation, essentially. And worked with the Department of Commerce for a little while on an organization that supports first responders called FirstNet, and what the technology looks like to support law enforcement and other first responders in the field. So worked with a few different agencies.
Did you find that most of the team that you were working with were prior military?
Very few of them. I was the only prior military person on my project for the Department of Defense. So in that way, I was able to be a resource. I didn't know how to use a printer or use Excel, but I was learning quickly and I understood the military culture.
And from that job, did it open up other opportunities, open up your perspective on where your future was going to be?
So I'm always thinking about the next step.
We've established that.
Yeah. I do not want to.
Let me guess, you're already thinking about the next podcast you're going to do.
Not now that you mention it.
You're like, hey, I got to wrap this one up.
Yeah, no. So I was at Deloitte. Everything was going well, which was a good sign that I needed to change things. Right? I don't like things going well. That means you're getting stale. So I was the new person. Basically, took over this project for the manager, and it was going well. So I applied to more programs to go back to school. And that had just kind of been my way out at this point, go back to school. And I had been interested in the Harvard Kennedy School, and I felt like I needed to apply. I don't know why. I felt drawn to it. So I applied, had no way to pay for it, no savings to live off of for a year.
Can't imagine Harvard Kennedy's expensive.
I was at a GI Bill at this point too. I finally burned that up during my MBA program. So I had no way to pay.
I'd imagine the GI Bill get burned in like the first semester at Harvard Kennedy.
Yeah.
If you had any left.
If I had any. And I already had student loans, so here I was. Why would I walk away from a stable job with one of the most coveted companies in the MBA world for MBA grads, with a clear path to become a partner someday, doing well? Why would I walk away from that? But I felt like I could grow more.
Because it wasn't rock climbing without ropes.
Yeah. It got old. After a year and a half, I was good at spreadsheets and PowerPoint and
you know how to work
meetings.
A printer.
So I learned that stuff. So I applied to the Harvard Kennedy School, not having any clue whether I'd be able to get in or not. I think what helped me was writing good essays, because I wrote from the heart about my experiences in Iraq and the impact I had seen geopolitics have on people's lives and children's lives, and visiting refugee camps and all of this. So I wrote essays that meant a lot to me. And I think that came through for the people that read them.
Was there ever a point in all of, because I want to give away too much yet, because you still got some more college to go. Shocker. But you didn't graduate high school. You kind of muscled and muddled your way through your undergrad program, and now you're into Vanderbilt's grad program. For somebody who didn't have a solid study base, a solid base of how to write well, study well, all of that, where was the biggest struggle for you?
The biggest struggle, interesting.
Or did you not struggle?
I didn't have a math background. That was always kind of my weakness. I was okay at math. I did okay on the GMAT, the business school test for math, but I was never exceptional at it. I did fine in statistics. Accounting was tough for me just because I found it really boring. So I guess that was my struggle, and not having the business background, just maybe that insecurity that everyone else had worked in this office environment and I hadn't. But I had been through Marine Corps boot camp, and I knew how to focus, and I cared about actually learning. I think there were a lot of people there just for the piece of paper with their name on it and the gold star. And I was there to learn and grow. So that made a huge difference.
How old were you when you got to Vanderbilt?
I was 29.
Were you significantly older than most of your cohort?
A little bit. In terms of life experience, though, I mean, most people had partied their way through college, got in an analyst job somewhere, and that was kind of all they knew. So I had been a police officer. I had been to Iraq 7 times. I had worked in Jerusalem in the West Bank. So I had some more life experience.
Was that a personal struggle to find a common relating point? Just struggle with relationships with the rest of your cohort because of all of your life experience?
It was hard for people that chose to go to Nashville to party, because they've got a good bar scene. That was not me. That's not why I was in school. So I think there was a maturity difference there.
You also had a family already.
I had a family. I had my 3rd daughter while I was in business school, so that added a challenge. I like to have challenges. So I was very focused on my family too, and trying to spend time with them while going to business school and find a new career. And again, being in faith mode, where I had no idea if this bet to go to business school was going to work out or not, career-wise, income-wise.
So Harvard Kennedy gets on your radar. You start figuring out a way how you're going to get through it.
I applied. My wife thought I was kind of crazy. I mean, there was
finally at this point, she thinks you're a little crazy.
She thought I was crazy all along because she was with me when I was homeless after the Marine Corps. I had nothing going for me. And thank God, she saw something in me then. But I had learned to risk everything. And I wanted to do it again. So I applied. I got a call. They said I got in. I was blown away, but I had no idea how I was going to pay for it. So I was in this position where I was going to have to turn down an offer to go to Harvard because I couldn't afford it. I had 4 daughters at that point. And
it would have required relocation to Massachusetts?
I was living in Virginia. I would have had to go up to Massachusetts, to Cambridge, Boston area, plus $100K plus in tuition, and not having income, leaving my job.
1-year program or 2-year program?
It was a 1-year program. And then I got another call and they said, hey, we accepted you for this veteran scholarship. I said, great. That's great to hear. Unfortunately, I'm probably still not going to be able to afford it. They said, well, we're giving you a full ride and we're going to pay you to come. So I got a Center for Public Leadership fellowship. They gave me full tuition ride, and they gave me a fellowship stipend to offset the cost of moving up there and everything. So it worked out.
For other veterans who might be interested in that same path, is that something that they regularly will extend, or were you just a blue moon case?
This was the first year they had ever had this fellowship. And honestly, I don't think most people got that type of support, that level of support. So I felt very blessed or, lucky. But there is a program now for 25 veterans a year to get Center for Public Leadership fellowships.
And with that program, it would whoever might be interested in it, they are going to have to go back to Boston for a year. It's not a remote.
It's in person, and they recruit from Harvard Business School, Harvard Law School, and the Harvard Kennedy School. And they pick 25 veterans from across all those schools. So first you have to get in there to the program, and then they decide if they want to bring you into the fellowship.
So how was that year? Cold. Well,
that was the first thing I was thinking. It was very cold up there. Coming from San Diego, moving all the way to Boston. I'm moving my wife, farther and farther away from palm trees. So that was tough. Living in a tiny place.
With 4 daughters.
With 4 daughters and a dog. But I mean, I just loved being at the center of, so many great experiences, learning firsthand from people that had worked for 5 presidents. I mean, getting the intangibles. I appreciated every school I went to. I went to 2 or 3 community colleges, I think 3 community colleges, and I had fantastic professors there that taught me things that I think about all the time now. The one difference between those schools and Harvard was that I got more of that intangible behind the scenes, like this is what it's like to sit in the situation room during a major crisis. And I think that intangible experience was very valuable, but Harvard academics wasn't harder than the other schools I had been to. I did accidentally sign up for the hardest math class they had. So that was tough, but I got through it. You just don't quit and you try and figure it out.
Heading into that program, was there something at the end of that process that you were aiming for as far as career-wise with this new degree?
So I was working for Deloitte's government and public sector practice, and I told my leadership, I'm going to the Harvard Kennedy School. This is going to make me a better consultant, and it's going to make me a more qualified consultant for the clients that we work with. And they said, too bad, we need you to work. And I said, too bad, I'm not turning down a full ride to Harvard. So eventually I had to leave Deloitte, but I had something else I was working toward. I didn't know where it was going to end up. I thought, maybe I'll run for office someday. Maybe I'll go back and get a government job at some point, not to make more money, but to have more of an impact. But I didn't know what it would lead to. I just knew that it felt like a step forward.
So coming out of that program, what ended up happening right after that?
So COVID happened and we moved out of Boston back to Virginia. And I was ambitious. I applied for jobs that were probably above my level to get. Not that I couldn't have done the job, but I couldn't prove that I could do the job. And a big part of getting hired is proving that you can do the job, of course. So I had trouble getting hired. And I now had student loans from multiple grad schools and 4 kids. And
did COVID actually have an impact, though, I would imagine, on the hiring process? Were companies hiring less people?
So Deloitte had layoffs. They laid off a ton of people. I was actually one of them. That's how I left. Everyone was uncertain. Nobody knew how long it was going to last or how bad it was going to be. So it was a scary time to be on the job market. And eventually I decided to try and start my own consulting firm, which...
Your favorite thing to do.
seemed like a good thing to do. I was throwing stuff against the wall. I had no idea what was going to work. And I ended up landing my first contract with Microsoft. So that gave me confidence that I could have my own consulting practice. I worked with some people that had relationships with Microsoft, signed a contract. It was short term, but it showed me that I could run my own business this way. And that was exciting. I still only had 2 years of consulting experience, like 2 years of office experience at this point. And here I was going into Microsoft, like telling them how they should, do better. But I was able to add a lot of value because I had leadership experience and I had learned the frameworks and the Excel and the PowerPoint pretty quickly.
And from that, did it just, the idea of being your own boss just never went away, and that's what's driven you to this point?
Pretty much. I always had an entrepreneurial spirit, and consulting came easier to me. I tried other things that didn't work out as well. I tried to start an app to compete with Instagram and Facebook, and put a lot of money and time into that. Learned a lot from it, but it didn't work out. Consulting has made sense, and I've been able to really help people there.
What was the catalyst to come back to California?
Family, my wife's family, her grandmother was having some, health challenges and stuff. And so, we were really conflicted about where to move, but family came first. And that's been big for me. When we face these decisions, you're going to have 20 or 30 different metrics of how you could measure success and the climate of where you're moving and the cost of living and job opportunities. But there are always going to be one or two that matter more than anything else. And I think if you make decisions based on your values and your priorities, then everything else is going to fall into place.
When did you get into leadership coaching?
That was a natural part of the consulting work that I was doing. I was designing leadership development programs for these companies and leading management trainings. I was a transformation leader. So my job was to help companies go through these really tough challenges. And part of that was helping their executives become better leaders and communicate the right way, and writing emails for them, teaching them how to talk to people in a town hall meeting. And so it was very natural for me to start coaching these leaders on more of a one-on-one basis versus just being a consulting resource.
Do you find that in the civilian sector, but when you're talking about teaching leadership, do you fall back more on being a Marine or more on what you learned going to college?
That's a really good question. I fall back on the Marine Corps in terms of keeping it simple. Again, there are so many priorities and competing initiatives in these companies. And if you can help them simplify, they will be much more successful. So brilliance in the basics, that's a Marine Corps concept that I've applied to everything I've done in the business world. And keeping your Marines informed is a leadership principle in the Marine Corps. I'm always trying to keep people informed that I'm working with. So there are a lot of military principles that I apply quite a bit, but time management, I learned that in business school and consulting for sure. That's incredibly important.
For you going down a very non-traditional path out of the Marine Corps and through all of the education institutions and everything else that you went through, looking back on it, I don't necessarily want to say, would you change anything, but what'd you learn along the way as far as if you were doing it over again today, boy, I wish I would have known that?
What I learned is that you can get from wherever you are to wherever you want to be if you are committed to it and you put in the work and you surround yourself with the right people. Wherever you want to go, you can get there one step at a time. You're not going to go straight from A to Z, but if you're willing to take those baby steps, you can get there. That's the biggest thing I learned. I'm sure people a lot smarter than me would have gone straight from Marine Corps to Stanford or Harvard or something, but that just wasn't my journey. I took it one step at a time, and because of that, I had a better foundation each time to take the next step.
The logical question then would be, when's the PhD program?
I've thought about that. I love the idea of just going somewhere and just studying for a few years, but PhD programs are very academic, and I like being in the practical applied world now. I spent a lot of time focused on learning, and what I realized was that I wasn't executing enough. And so now I try to be very intentional about balancing my execution and my education, because you can only learn so much before you start to lose it. If you don't apply what you learn right away, then you're going to lose it. And so I believe in action-driven education. I figure out what I want to do next in my business, and then I learn how to do it. AI automation, I'll learn it when I need to do it. Instead of trying to learn everything and then go do it, it doesn't work that way. Not as well.
AI is not going to take hold. It's a passing fad.
Well, it's not the end all be all either. A lot of people think it's going to replace all of our jobs. I think it's going to augment us. And of course, it will keep getting better by light years every few years, but it's not taking over yet.
Along that line, when you're talking to business leaders, what's your advice for when they see something like an AI, as far as jumping on board right away and trying to embrace it and utilize it to its fullest advantages? Or are you somebody who says, let's sit back and see how it develops?
So I think AI is ready to be used to add value in many ways, but you have to look at where you're at as a company first. And there are companies that have not moved to the cloud yet that have to move to the cloud before they integrate some type of chat GPT driven feature. So having the right roadmap, zooming out, seeing the big picture, AI should be the final step on a technology maturity journey. But you got to put the pieces in place before that. Some companies need to fix their email systems or their, CRM, customer relationship management systems before they implement any type of AI. So don't jump straight to the shiny object out there. There's some low-hanging fruit that companies need to deal with first.
It's weird when you think about it's 2024 and there's still companies that need to catch up to 2024 before they even could think about moving beyond it.
Yeah, I mean, the government too, the IRS is using mainframe computers from decades ago, 60 years ago. There are barely any people alive that know those programming languages. So most companies have a ton of technical debt, and they need to deal with it before it bites them.
From your experience, do you find that when a company gets to a certain size, whatever it is, it almost becomes a barrier to innovation and improvement because it's such a big ship to move in a different direction?
It's a really interesting journey that companies go through. They start off, and most companies are successful because they're very good at one thing. They're good at selling. A lot of times that's incredibly important. Or they have one product that just does super well, and they might have very bad internal processes. And so they reach a certain level of maturity where they say, we need to fix things in our house and clean up their internal environment. And maybe they go public, or they get bought by a private equity firm, and the private equity firm and the investors say, you've got to fix this stuff now. You've got to improve your technology. That's going to help you grow and scale faster. And then that company grows to a point where they become a dinosaur, like a lot of Fortune 500s, and they are too big and unwilling to innovate and change, and they die off because of that. Your Sears, they've had something that's worked for a long time. They don't want to change it, and that ends up being the death of them.
With your journey to this point and always looking for that next thing, has there been a little bit of settling down with you? And are you on a path now where, I'll use the term, you're kind of in a cruise mode, or is there something in your future that's already on your horizon?
I'm very aware of how I invest my time now. So I'm protective of my family time, and I wouldn't call it cruise control. I'm still ambitious and doing as much as I can, but intentional about the family time too. I am not jumping from one thing to another because I feel like I found it. And I think people should jump around more until they find what their thing really is. I'm in the business of helping people reach their full potential, and that's very fulfilling for me. And I will be doing that for the rest of my life.
Going back to the very beginning of our conversation, let's talk about the fun stuff. Have you stayed with the martial arts?
I have. So I have been doing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for 17 years now. Got my black belt about 5 years ago. It takes about 10 or 12 years to get a black belt in BJJ, and train locally here at a few different schools. My home gym is Excel Jiu Jitsu in Oceanside with Professor Michio Grubbs. So I got my black belt from Professor Michio and Chris Outer, who's kind of a legend in the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu community. And I love it. I'm still learning from that too. So took a little detour from jiu-jitsu, got into Ironman training a little bit during COVID, and I've enjoyed that too. It's good to round out jiu-jitsu training with more endurance training.
Did you end up doing an Ironman?
I've done 2 halves. Is
a full on the horizon?
I wanted to do a full last year. It didn't work out. So
it's just a long day of training.
I enjoy the training.
I say that only because I've got 20 years under my belt since I did my one and only one. So.
Oh, you did a full?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
where was that?
New Zealand. Absolutely amazing experience. I would not give it up for the world.
Yeah.
It took a lot to get there. It took a lot to get through it, but it's something that I'm proud that I've done. but at the same token, it eats up a garbage ton of your life.
It's a ton of time, doing 3, 4, 5 hour workouts on a Saturday morning, which I enjoy. I've got so many projects going on right now. So,
do you ever keep the taekwondo going?
I haven't. Somebody once told me that your second martial art becomes your true love. And that was kind of true for me. I love taekwondo, but I'm learning a lot with jiu-jitsu, and I love the community. So it's a very humble community. And it's cool now. Everywhere I go, I end up doing jiu-jitsu, right? So I went to the Bahamas. Somebody bumped into me, saw my BJJ shirt. I spent every day that week on vacation teaching BJJ. Same thing in Costa Rica. I think somebody saw my shirt and pulled me in. And I was down there for 2 months in 2018. And I trained like every day there. So it's a really cool, special community. And especially for first responders and veterans, if you're not plugged into the BJJ community, it's a really good family to have after you leave the camaraderie of service.
I'm only 3 years into my journey, but you hit the nail on the head. One of the things that I enjoy the most is when I do know that I'm going to be traveling somewhere. It's like, all right, let me see if there's a studio near.
Find the gym. Absolutely.
And the welcoming nature of every gym that I've ever called. Hey, I'm going to be here for 3 days. You might have, sure, come on down. I was at a studio in Vegas, and I happened to call him just as he was closing up for the day. He's like, come on down. He goes, there's a couple of us still hanging out. It's like you said, it's the camaraderie. From a personal perspective, yes, if you're in the first responder community, very easy to say you should be doing it because it's going to help you do your job. But the thing is that there's such a component of you really kind of tune out the world when you're on the mats. And that's what's taking all of your attention at that moment.
Absolutely. You could be rock climbing or you could be doing jiu-jitsu, but do something that requires your full attention. And you can't stress about work while you're rolling on the mats. Try not to get choked out. I mean, you're fighting for your life. There's no reason to stress about anything else. You're not on your phone staring at a screen. So I love it. I'd recommend it to pretty much anybody.
Any last pieces of advice for veterans making their transition, and coupled with obviously your extensive journey to get to where you're at today?
Thank you. The biggest thing I'd say is just don't do it by yourself. There are a lot of people who get out and they get isolated. They go back home and they're stuck by themselves. And so stay in touch with the people that you served with, whether, that's law enforcement or military, and find new people, get plugged into communities, find that jiu-jitsu community, go back to school, find a way to keep growing and building relationships. And that's where opportunities in life are going to come from. But the biggest mistake I see people make is trying to do it by themselves. Don't do that.
And through your process, any books that you strongly recommend for people?
I'm a big fan of Alexander Hamilton. If you don't want to read the book, get the audio book. And he was an incredible young veteran who was ambitious and find ways to serve despite coming from a dirt poor background and having no family support. So reading the stories of people like that, I think most people probably recommend business books, but when you study the lives of people like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, go read James Cook or Churchill, Napoleon, all these guys and so many others. Read their life stories and how they faced surprisingly similar challenges to what we face. And you'll see how they made it work and overcame. So I've really enjoyed that, diving into these biographies. And I'd recommend that to people. Get the audio book and just go for a run or a walk and listen to these books.
Do you find that that's what you resonate most with when you're reading somebody else's story, is that kind of aha, like, whoa, they experienced almost the exact same thing I did?
Yeah. And, even much more extreme examples of than I faced. You read a 50-hour biography about Winston Churchill, and you come to understand him in a powerful way. And you can learn from his entire life experience over those 50 hours versus you figuring it out again on your own. And so I feel like I have this board of advisors of these incredibly successful people who overcame these things. You look at Churchill. I mean, he was a prisoner of war. He was laughed out of military service. He was the first Lord of the Admiralty, made a mistake or had some bad luck, you might say, and thought his career was probably over at that point, and came back later to be, prime minister during World War II. All of these people came from dirt poor backgrounds. James Cook, dirt poor, grew up on the farm, got inspired to go sail the world because of these South Sea shillings that he found, these coins from the other side of the world, and became the greatest explorer of all time. Really powerful to just hear these stories of people who were not special. They weren't necessarily rich or smarter than everyone else, but they had a clear vision for their life, and they got back up every time they fell down.
I think that's the big thing for most people to understand is you'd be surprised how many people don't have fairy tale stories, that there are so many successful people in this world who really, really had to embrace resilience and not give up and keep going.
Absolutely. I mean, Napoleon, didn't eat many days while he was in school so he could take care of his family with that money. George Washington left the British military service basically in frustration and disgrace. Whatever you're facing can be overcome. You look at Truman. Harry Truman went back to work on the farm for 10 years. I mean, can you imagine spending 10 years tilling the soil? You must think your big dreams are over. And then he becomes the president of the U.S. toward the end of World War II and has to make, decisions about the end of the war with Japan. I mean, whatever you think is the end of your career or your life, you're giving too much power.
And to not in any way make light of it or in any way make it sound like I'm saying this sarcastically, but to a degree, you're in the same boat. You forged a path that many times came to barriers, walls, whatever you want to refer to it as, and you found a way around it, and you found a way to keep pushing on. So, I commend you for that.
Thank you. For me, hope was the only option. I was not going to accept the fact that I was stuck anywhere. That felt like death to me, to feel stuck. So I had to choose hope, and I was willing to risk things. Les Brown says that many people choose known hells over unknown heavens. And people are afraid of the unknown. But the chances of you having the best possible job for you in the entire world out of all the millions of opportunities is pretty low. So you have to take that leap of faith and see what else is out there. And, I think there are points where I could have said, well, I'm just an infantry guy. I'm just a shooter. I'm just a cop. I can't do this. Challenge those assumptions and get curious about what you're really capable of and say, what if? Because doors will open.
And equally important, like you experienced, I don't want to be a consultant. Last thing I want to do is be a consultant. But you explored it. You peeked your head in the door and went, oh, wait a minute. I can do this, as opposed to had you buried your head in the sands that I don't want to do consulting work. Who knows where that would have changed or where you would have ended up.
Be curious, experiment with different stuff, take assessments, talk to people, get feedback. You can do whatever you want to. You made it through police academy or boot camp. You've done hard things before, and going to school is no different.
I appreciate your time. I wish you all the best going forward.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.